Hey guys, I'm John P, and on today's show, I'm going to teach you how to build what may be the world's greatest welding table. Welcome to Geek Beat. Okay guys, I am first going to give you a tour of the Certiflat Fab Block. This is a brand new table coming from the guys over at Tab and Slot. And this is a very unique welding table. First of all, you can tell by looking at it, it's just freaking gorgeous and impressive. So every person that has come by here and taken a look at this since I finished it has just been wowed by it. It is also extremely heavy, but notice how easily it moves. And you'll see later when we start fabricating on it, this is a feature that I really love. The wheels, the legs, it's so solid, but being able to put something on here and while you're welding, spin it around and then hit the next piece and get it back and forth, it's fantastic. So it's very smooth operation and it's just a great welding surface. Now let me talk about the features of it. First of all, it is extremely flat. Carter, come down here and let's look at it. It is almost impossible to not make this thing flat because it's going to come in a kit with little slots and tabs that you can see that have been welded together right here, and when you piece them all together and clamp it in place and then weld it, it stays perfectly flat. So first thing I would say is, whether you are a professional welder or whether you are just starting out, this is the most important part of your welding. The things you build are only going to be as flat as the surface you build them on. So, I don't know about you, but 10 years ago when I started welding, I built myself my own little welding table, and I've been welding on it ever since until I got this thing. I sure wish I had had this in the past. So, they are not very expensive. You need to go ahead and pony up right now because a kit like this is a few $100. So, just in the steel alone that you're going to spend to build your own, it's going to be, you know, a lot. So just pony up for one of these. Now let's talk about the features. First of all, we talked about how it's built, but let's take a look underneath so you can see the real framework here. You'll notice it's kind of divided into 9 quadrants because there is a supporting infrastructure in place, and you're going to see these kind of locked together. Each of the 4 corners has a plate underneath it, and you can see that we have the optional leg kit here that bolts right onto these plates. Now, I have secured the legs and the top together with 2 bolts in each of these corners, so there's 8 bolts holding it. It will never move, that's probably overkill, but if we take those bolts off, you could technically remove this tabletop and use it in conjunction with another, and I'll show you how that would work later. But let's look down a little further. The table legs are 2-inch square steel. It's about 8-inch thick steel, so it's super strong. And the way they go together, there are 4 little pieces that connect down here that get welded in place. They're slotted together, so if you notice, they have these laser cut slots on the bottom. It's pretty cool. The machine that cuts them does it perfectly every time. Also, you'll see later the way these legs are made. They are cut at the top and bottom on the laser. There are little mounting plates that go on the bottom, and the kit comes with these 4 wheels. You simply bolt them in place. One thing I like about these wheels, when you lock them, not only do they not move this way, but they don't move this way. They are locked in that direction as well. So it's pretty cool. And you could lock all 4 of them in the outermost positions to keep them nice and stable. All right, let's take a look at these parts. First of all, these pieces right here, we've got 8 pieces that make up the inner and outer framework. So you'll notice there are 2 pairs of these. These are 6 inches tall, and the kit that I have is the 30-inch kit. Now the standard fab blocks are 24-inch kits. I opted for a larger option, this 30-inch, and by the way, they will custom make you any size you want over there. So if you need something special, that's what they do. They make specialized jigs and fixtures and tables for tremendous numbers of industry welding teams. So just request anything you need. Like I was saying, these are the outside pieces. You can see these are the ones that go right here. They wrap around. And then these pieces are the ones that go in the middle. They are the bracing structure for the surface. Now over here, we've actually got all the components for the legs. These are the legs that I was talking about, and you can see better how these pieces are laser cut here. It's very cool. The machine that they cut them on just turns the tubes all over the place and cuts them, and bingo bango, there you got it. You'll see how it fits together right here. This is going to drop in there and slide down, and then we'll just give them a little welding in place so these won't move later. Also, you'll notice that the legs have different patterns cut at the top and at the bottom. So you can't, technically actually that's the top and that's the bottom, so you can't get it wrong. And then there are little plates that go on each one. So this plate will slot right in there, and that's why they call it tab and slot. And we'll pound that in place, make sure that it stays there, weld it, and then the wheels fit right on there, and you'll notice they are made to perfectly fit. It's a beautiful kit, I love it. Likewise at the top, we have this plate, and the way it works is this part slots right in there. And what is super cool and super ingenious is that with this plate on here, you will notice it slots down into those holes. And so now I can move the whole table that way, but this is where we bolted in. So once this is put in place, not only do the 2 bolts or however many bolts you decide to use help hold it, but those little pieces sticking out the bottom also hold it. So super, super cool. Okay, now all of that is going to get welded to the top, and this is what the top looks like. It comes as one big piece, super heavy, and although it's not really sharp because the edges are clean from the laser cutting, I would recommend you use gloves. You don't want to be doing this really barehanded. Okay, so there is our top. And then, as I was mentioning, there are 4 corner pieces that go on the bottom, and these are those 4 corner pieces. Now, one thing to note is, and when we start fabricating it, you'll see, these look like they're all identical, but they're not. Actually, they will only fit together in one way. So keep in mind that they look symmetrical. They're not really symmetrical. So we have to pay attention to that while we're assembling them. Now, I want to show you one other piece. This is another part of the fab block system. This is basically a shelf that can be used to extend the table. So if we have it like that, it could be bolted on the side, and it adds an additional foot of length to the table. Or we could use it standing up for fixturing. So imagine this tabletop was welded up. We could put it there like that. And now we could mount fixtures to the bottom and to the top. Now some of you are saying, well, wait a minute, what's all this fixture talk and why all these holes everywhere? Well, here's why, because it's for the tooling. There are different tools that we can get that will allow us to just stick it in the slot or stick it in the hole. There we go. And then we could put a piece here and clamp it in place so that it holds what we're going to work on. Also, there are little pins you can put in the holes and all kinds of tools. So that's the purpose of these holes. And the holes are standard 5/8 inch holes. So, all right, that's a tour of all the goodies. Let's start putting it together. Okay, this is a little counterintuitive because we have this beautiful work surface here, but we're actually not going to use it. You're going to notice what I'm doing is I'm just taking a piece of a couple of crappy, not even 2x6 sections, and I'm going to use these and I'm going to put that table on top of it. The reason why is we're going to assume that anything you have to build this table is less precise than the table we're building, so we can't use it. It just doesn't matter. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to lay the surface on that wood and just pretend that's like a sawhorse. Okay, so you've got that on a couple of sawhorses or something like that. Just prop it up. It's good, don't worry, because the unit is going to pretty much be self-centering. Okay, now we have 4 of these interior pieces. And you're going to notice that there are tabs on the bottom of 2 of them with slots poking up from the top when the tabs are pointed down. So we take those tabs and we kind of fit them down into one like that. Same thing with the other. And then guess what these do? They're going to go right down like so. These tabs are really pretty tight, so that's what we want, because once we get everything built up, we're going to clamp it in place and they're going to hold themselves where we want them to be when they get welded. So don't worry about the fact that you have to tap them in place, just do it. Now once you've hammered them, make sure there are no gaps anywhere. What I did was, before I put them in place, I checked all the edges and I checked the surface to make sure there wasn't any kind of little pieces of metal clinging to it that might get in the way, create a gap. We want to make sure that it is perfectly flat. Then we're going to start putting our outer edges in place. You have 2 of each of a different cut. The primary difference being at the edges. One of them has an edge that is inset and the other one has an edge that sticks out. The 2 of each, the pair of each, will go across from one another so they interlock. Okay, you can see just how fast we got it all framed up. It took a couple of minutes. Everything tapped itself into place. It's snug, but not too tight. Now it's time to put our 4 pieces on these corners here. Now remember, they will only go one way, so you need to kind of take them and turn them until you find the position that fits just right, and you'll know it when you find it. Okay, at this point, with everything just kind of dry fit together and nothing clamped, we can take some sort of a straight edge and place it across there and start looking to see how precise is it at the moment. It already looks incredibly flat. So what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and maintain that level of flatness while we weld it up. Remember, as we're putting weld beads everywhere, they create heat, and as they heat and cool, we get expansion and contraction. So really what we're going to try and do is prevent all of that movement in the process. So the way that we're going to go about this is not the officially sanctioned method of doing it. It's just what I found to be easiest. So you've got an option. You can follow the official instructions, or you could give this a try. All right, here's the deal. All I did was ran down to Lowe's and picked up a bunch of bolts. These are 8-inch long, 1/2-inch bolts. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to thread them through. You can just go right up from the bottom and screw that thing in place. Use a couple of washers, and we're going to get them 1 in each of the 4 corners, and then also 1 in each of the interior corners as well. So we'll have 2 here, 2 here, 2 here, and 2 here. So I'm going to do that real quick and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm getting this last one in place. By the way, the reason I have to use the little washers is because I bought the 8-inch bolts. They were out of the 7-inch ones, but if you had 7-inch ones, you might be able to get away with not doing the washers. I would not recommend getting the actual 5/8 inch bolts, even though these are 5/8 inch holes, because you just don't need it to be that tight and it'll be super snug. So the 1/2 inch bolts will fit best. Now that we've got these 8 bolts in place, that's going to allow us to tighten them up and put some torque on holding it together with the surface of the table. So that'll be good. But what we don't really have right now is anything holding the outer pieces together. So for that, I'm going to use just some threaded rod, and I'm going to stick it through with 3 different pieces. Very Houdini-like here. And we'll secure the outside with a washer and a bolt. This is going to allow us to also put a little torque on the edges from both sides to make sure it's very snug in every possible direction. Okay, I've got the bolts in place everywhere. Keep in mind, I opted to go for the bolts because for me it's easiest and because I plan on building more than one of these tables. So this makes it super repeatable, super quick. If you have standard clamps, you could, as long as they're big enough, clamp this thing in place as well. It's just, to me, you won't be able to get them quite as tight, and I worry about being able to move it around. With these bolts on it, I can pretty much move it anywhere I want and they are not going to shift. So, you know, $20, $30 worth of bolts, I think is going to give you a much better installation here. So, next step is to gently tighten everything up while continuously looking for and checking the straightness and flatness to make sure we're not torquing it in one direction or another. Remember, after you've flattened up the top, make sure all the sides are perfectly flat, especially because with these bolts, you can easily tighten it too much and squeeze them in, and you don't want that to be your permanent mode of operation there. Okay, now that I've checked everything 2 or 3 times, it's time to weld. But the first thing we're gonna do is just tack weld, and we're gonna try and get in there, barely tack weld, just enough to hold it in place, get in, get out with the least amount of heat as possible. All right, I started with that one, so we're gonna come across to the other side and we're gonna make a weld here real quick. Then we're going to come across from that one as well. So we're going to try and keep continuously moving across diagonally as we tack weld each of these points on top, so that as they contract and expand a little bit, we're evening it out everywhere. Then once we've got all our tacks in place, we're going to check it again for level. Okay, now after you've gone around and you've tack welded all the interior ones and the exterior ones, again using the same technique of alternating sides so that the heat pulls it in different directions and hopefully evens it all out while checking for level all around. By the way, if you find that it's unlevel in a spot, get your hammer and tap on that side. You can bring it down. If there's a high point, tap on the hammer, bring it down a little bit, then keep going. Now, once you've done all that, it is time to flip this thing over. But for that, you're gonna need some help. Carter, can I get a hand over here? Because this bad boy weighs 160 pounds. Do not do this at home, folks. All right, you ready? We'll do this side first. Now, interestingly, you'll note I have these bolts sticking up from this side. So when you go to turn it over, it's probably going to be resting on the bolts, which is okay, again, because the surface beneath is not what's giving us our stability. It's the structure itself. Okay, so every single slot on this thing now has a tack weld in place. So effectively, this is one giant piece. It'd be very hard to take it apart, but just to make sure it never comes apart, we're gonna go back and basically fill in the slot. Now, what we're not trying to do is completely fill it in and then have to grind it flat. No, that's not what we're looking for. We just want to put a little more weld in every slot to make sure we're covering from side to side and the bottom, so that we get a good complete weld everywhere and make it super, super solid. So that's the next step. Okay, once the welds are all complete, it's time to take all the jigs off, and next step, it's time to get to the legs. Okay, we've got a little bit more welding to do now that the top's finished. We need to put the legs together. Now you can see I've kind of test fit these pieces. So on this end, this is actually the bottom. We've got the piece that the wheel will bolt onto. And here's the trick that I discovered with this one. You're going to, it could go on pretty tight, okay, but you may have to hammer it right in the middle to get it down in there, but get it all the way down so that when you look at it from the side, you see right now there's a little gap. It's a little hard to see. Oh, there you go. There's a tiny gap in between the plate and the corner. We don't want that. I need to get that down even further, so there we go. Something like that, where I've closed the gap. That's good. Now, technically, we should probably weld it right out here, put little tack welds around the outside. But what I've discovered is that the wheels have a circular indentation there. And if you happen to tack weld around these points, the wheels cover up the weld and it doesn't interfere with them at all. So you end up like, if you look at the table down here, you end up with no weld points anywhere around the wheels. It's just a super clean look. So I kind of like that. So my recommendation is do some welding in here to weld this base to the tabs, and then you can fit this over it. Now keep in mind one other thing. When you do this, you're welding a piece of 1/4 inch steel to a piece of 1/8 inch steel. So turn the heat down. You've been welding 1/4 to 1/4 on the tabletop, you can take a lot more heat. This, you gotta be careful not to burn through the tube. Okay, on the other end, we've got kind of the same thing going on. We want this plate to come all the way down and close the gap. So you can see I've got that pretty much closed right there. And then this one, there's really not a good place to weld on the inside. You can try tack welding a little, but you don't want any weld material out here on this plate because this piece is going to stand flat on here. So no excess weld down here because it's going to screw up the placement. So instead, we're going to weld this one around here. You've got some nice little gaps. Just fill those gaps in, go around, and you'll be done. So I'm going to tack all these together and then get it welded up, and then we will assemble the final pieces and get it turned over. Okay, so we've got both ends welded and all the pieces are positioned where they need to be. Again, remember these poles have little tabs on them, little feet that stick out, and all you need to do is try and center them on the center block of 9 holes here. So line up the holes, and these pieces will fit right down into the 4 in this corner, just like that. Okay, now once these are there, we're going to put these support braces in all 4 areas. But here's a tip. Whenever they make tubular steel, there's always a seam on one side. So you'll notice all 4 of these pieces have this one seam. It's kind of ugly, not that everything is beautiful, but just to make it look a little nicer, let's keep the seam pointing downward, which means in this case upwards. So you're going to just kind of slot these into place, tap them down, they lock in, and then we're going to put a little weld with the seam pointing up. Okay, you're gonna notice that what I'm doing is I've got these little bolts that I'm sticking in so they're pointing essentially upward towards the tabletop surface. And the reason why is simple. If we were to put them the other way, it would block the wheel from turning. So they've got to be pointing downward. And then we're using lock nuts. I'm using lock nuts everywhere. The lock nuts hold the legs on, the lock nuts hold the wheels on. We don't want these things getting loose over time. So I'm going to get these installed, and then we're going to turn this table over and we'll be about done. Let me put it straight up. Well, we finally completed the table. That took, a couple of hours, mainly because each one of these tables has about 80 plus weld points just on the top, plus then there's the legs and everything else. So you think about it, you probably tack welded at least 100 times and then welded 100 times. So that's really it. But it's not hard to do, and you don't have to be a great welder. That's the beauty of this system. Even if you were a beginner, all you have to do is be able to make those welds and keep it inside the little channels, and you're going to come out with the most perfect, straight, flat table ever. Now, one of the other things I really like about this particular line of tables is because it's got that 6-inch sidewall, we can now pull these two together and use a plate here to connect them and turn them into one very solid, big surface. And remember, we've also got those wings that will extend it a foot on either side. So in this case, the two 30-inchers are going to be 60 inches plus 2 more. We got 7 feet. So that's a lot to work with. And you may also notice that I put a little eye bolt there. This is just a 1/2-inch eye bolt. And this is useful because we happen to have a winch up there in the ceiling. So we are able to mount the bolt here and pick this table up. We could load it in something, or leave them mounted on the sides. Get creative with the types of fixtures and attachments that you're going to use with your tables. And if these particular ones are a little too heavy duty for your needs, don't worry. They've got some still professional, but lower end, slightly less costly, much lighter models. And you can head over to weldtables.com to get them. You can also go to geekbeat.tv/weldtable, and I will have a list for you of all of the different accessories and every single step and everything that I did to put these things together. So that's it, guys. I am going to finish up by taking my grinder and putting a nice little polish on this surface like I did over here, just to sex it up a bit. I hope you guys enjoyed it. How about a thumbs up on YouTube and Facebook, and hit that subscribe button. We'll see you next time.